work. He said this, this, and this. Yes, he did say this, this, and this, and I have the right to disagree. But he said a lot of good things too. And it's, in the end, the criterion of good and bad is the truth, is the evidence. When somebody says things based on evidence, we take it. When somebody says things that are not based on evidence, we don't take it. The bottom line isn't the person, it's the truth itself. So we don't reject people based on a mistake that they make. I mean, think about that. Have you said something wrong before in your life? And somebody says, don't listen to that guy. You know that one time he said something that I didn't like, or that was wrong. I said it was wrong, but that doesn't discredit the person's work. A good example of that even though I'm not a fan of translations, is the Yusuf Ali translation. Yusuf Ali rahimahullah was one of the first translators of the Quran in English. Impeccable English translation. He had a very unique take on riba. He had he didn't think that interest as it is today is riba, as described in the Quran and Sunnah. He had a weird take on it or whatever. Most scholars didn't accept his take. That doesn't take away from the fact that the guy spent 20 years traveling the ummah, looking at historical sites and writing an extensive translation. May Allah reward him for it. He made a mistake, You call it a mistake, but you don't pass judgment on the person. Anyhow, the beautiful quote from Fakhruddin al-Razi in his Tafsir Kabir, this is what I wanted to share with you. هَذِهِ الْآيَةِ فِيهَا وَعِيدٌ شَدِيدٌ. The first thing. In this ayah there is an intense, a severe warning, a threat, and a warning that's filled with a promise. لِأَنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى حَكَمَ بِالْخَسَارَةِ. Because in this ayah Allah Azza wa Jal declared loss, utter loss, عَلَى جَمِيعِ النَّاسِ, against all humanity. Allah has mandated loss for all humanity altogether. جَمِيعِ النَّاسِ إِلَّا مَنْ كَانَ آتِيًا بِهَذِهِ الْأُمُورِ الْأَرْبَعَةِ. Except for the one who comes to Allah, who approaches with these four exceptions. That's what he's saying. But then he goes further and he says, وَدَلَّ ذَلِكَ أَنَّ النَّجَاةَ مُعَلَّقَةٌ بِمَجْمُوعَةِ هَذِهِ الْأُمُورِ. And the language illustrates that salvation, being saved on the Day of Judgment, hangs in the balance of these four things. You meet these four conditions and you're saved, and you don't, you're in trouble. And because of the language, it's illustrated that it's illustrated that, subhanallah. And this is why I felt it urgent to even make the announcement after Jum'ah to invite as many of you as possible to come and listen to the message of this surah, because in many ways this is the summary of the entire Quran, and in many ways this surah is a summary of all of the deen. It's a summary of the entire message of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is why ulama give this surah a lot of importance. It's 3 ayat. It's very short. Every kid memorizes it because it's easy. It's very easy. But the amount of scholarship that has been done on it is daunting. It is absolutely daunting how much work has been done on it. Now, in this series of discourse, what I want to share with you is in the previous surahs, Allah has made comments about the human being. For example, He said a few sessions ago we studied, يَا أَيُّهَا الْإِنسَانِ مَا غَرَّكَ بِرَبِّكَ الْكَرِيمِ. Human being, what deluded you? What kept you away from your gracious master? What was such a big distraction that deceived you? In other words, that you remember أَلْهَاكُمُ التَّكَاثُرُ? Allah is actually directly complaining to the human being in that surah, saying, what deluded you? What was it that took you away from your gracious master? Then Allah said, يَا أَيُّهَا الْإِنسَانِ إِنَّكَ كَادِحٌ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ كَدْحًا فَمُلَاقِيهِ. You forgetful human being, you are chugging away towards your Lord. Like it or not, you are headed towards your Lord, effort after effort after effort, and you're eventually going to meet Him. There's no avoiding it. You could be distracted all you want, you're still headed in that direction. Then He told the human being, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. We created the human being in enormous toil, meaning the life of the human being is full of labor. Whether you want to live like a believer or live like a kafir, doesn't matter, you're still going to have to work. You're still going to have problems. You're still going to deal with stuff in life. So your life is created in struggle. Why not make it a struggle that will benefit you here and the next life? Instead of just struggling, so it benefits you here and has no benefit for you in the next life. And why should you have concern for the next life? Allah Azza wa Jalla said, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. He went further a few surahs later. We created the human being in the best possible form. He was designed to achieve high things. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to achieve those high things because what do we find in this surah? إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. Despite that high noble status he was given, most human beings were not able to live up to that nobility. Allah Azza wa Jal makes a lot of comments about the human being with the kind of declaration that is found in the phrase إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ. This is not the only place in the Quran where we find the words إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ. This commentary about the human being occurs many times. What does إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ mean? The human being is no doubt something. Allah is going to say something, make some commentary about the human being. We found several variations in the Quran of إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَكَفُورٌ مُبِينٌ. No doubt the human being is openly and clearly extremely ungrateful and in extreme denial in regards to his master. We found إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا إِلَّا الْمُصَلِّينَ. The human being is created weak, pathetic, frail. Some things happen to him, he gets overwhelmed, overjoyed. Something bad happens to him, he loses all hope. Allah says, كَلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى. No doubt it is the human being that truly rebels. It is the human being that rebels. And the language suggests, don't blame it on anyone else. Don't say society made me rebel, shaitan made me rebel. Nobody else. Human being himself, he rebels. Then he says, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لِرَبِّهِ لَكَنُودٌ. Know that the human being, in regards to his master especially, is very disloyal. All these commentaries about the human being, he's ungrateful, he's created weak, he rebels, he's disloyal to his master. This is all commentary. But what's the conclusion? The conclusion is here. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. It's not an adjective of the human being. It's not a description of his behavior. It's now the consequence. What is the net result of all of these misbehaviors? The net result is he is immersed in a state of loss. Important considerations before we get into the surah itself. One more is the general principle versus the exception. Whenever you use the word illa, except, you are talking about what we call in English an exception. What is in majority? What is more in number? The rule or the exception? The rule is in more number and the exception is very few. You say everybody came except that one. When you use except, you're talking about one or two or a few that didn't come, everybody else is here. Now in this surah, what is the rule? What is the majority situation? وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. That's the rule. Human beings are immersed in loss, in doom. What's the exception? إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. By presenting the exception as those who believe and do good deeds, etc., that we're going to study, by presenting them in the form of an exception, what we're learning here is this is not going to be a lot of people. This is going to be few. The vast majority of human beings will be in loss. That's the rule. And the exceptions will be a few. May Allah Azza wa Jal make us from the exceptions. So now, we talked about Surah At-Teen having more of a style of tabshir, and this one having more of a style of indar, meaning good news versus warning. The other thing that's very important to highlight is Surah At-Teen mentioned ajr. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونٍ. Right? This surah doesn't mention any ajr. Ajr means reward. There Allah said, a reward that will never be discontinued, a reward that will never be forbidden from them. He uses those words. But in this surah, there's no mention of reward. The only mention is human beings are in loss except these people. But He doesn't say, and these people will get Jannah, and these people will get everlasting life, all of it, nothing. No mention of what they will get. The only thing that's mentioned is, these people are failures, and these people escaped. These people escaped. You know what this is? We call this, in simple English, we call this passing grades. Somebody gets an 85, somebody gets a 95, somebody gets 100, somebody gets an A, a B, or a C. But you know the guy who barely survived and didn't get the F? There's the F, right? Let's say, I don't know, in New York it's 65. Is that the failing grade here in Texas? I don't know. But 65 is your passing grade, basically. You get a 64, you failed. You get a 64, you failed. Now whether you get a 34, or 30, a 0, a 25, all of them get what grade? F. That's all an F. The only thing that will survive is 65 or above. You understand? Like passing grade or above. This surah is not talking about higher levels of success. Other surahs talk about success. They deal with what jannat, what gardens, what treasures. That's the subject matter of other surahs. This surah, the subject of it is who is not a failure. Now I put it in those terms because I want you to understand. This surah describes the bare minimum, the bottom line. Who is above the failing grade? Because anybody who didn't meet this minimum requirement is obviously what? A failure. They're a failure. So this surah is not about earning Jannah. This surah is more about escaping hellfire. This surah is not about success. It's more about survival. Which leads me to this very, very critical discussion that we need to have today. What is the difference between talking about success and talking about survival? My contention is this surah is not talking about success. What's it talking about? Survival. What's the difference between the two? You see, survival is something, when your survival is being questioned, you forget everything else. When you're drowning, when you're in a building with fire in it, right? When there's a danger headed your way, when your survival is in question, you forget everything. And when your survival is in question, there is no time for you to talk about your what? Success. There's no need to talk about success. I mean, if you're working in an office and you're talking to your boss about getting a promotion, what are you talking about? Success. But the building went on fire, and you say, let me finish talking about my promotion first. I haven't just finished negotiating with. Does that make any sense? No. Because you can't talk about success unless you've already secured your own survival. You understand? So before we talk about higher levels of paradise and higher success, what do we have to ensure we're okay with? At least we're surviving, we're not in the failing grade. That's the urgency of this surah. The bare minimum. The survival. And you know, it doesn't make any sense for someone to talk about or be concerned with anything else other than survival if they are not meeting the conditions of that survival. Imagine you have to get out of that building and there are 4 doors and all of those doors are locked. Until you unlock all 4, you shouldn't be worried about anything else. These are the 4 locks. Al-Iman, Al-A'mal al-Salihah, Tawasib al-Haq, Tawasib al-Sabr. These are the locks to your survival. You have to unlock all of these things so you and I can survive. That's the scenario that's being drawn for us in this profound surah. Also, this surah proves something very, very important. I keep saying there are 4 conditions. One of the benefits of knowing that there are 4 conditions is that this surah proves that being good on your own is not enough. Being good for yourself is not enough. Our deen is not just a concern with ourselves, it's also a concern with other people. And you're not doing it for other people, for them, you're actually doing it for yourself. And this surah is the proof. Why? Because Allah said, you are in loss unless you do, yes, iman and amilu salihah. That's for who? That's what I do. But tawasi bil haq, getting the truth to other people. Telling each other to be perseverant and remain committed. Is that about you or other people now? That's others. And you know, tafa'ul in Arabic, from which tawasi comes, it has ishtirak in it, people working together. So it proves, it actually necessitates the concern for others in this quest for our own salvation. Ash-Shawkani rahimahullah commented, it includes ad-du'a ila ad-din, wal-nasiha fi ad-din, wal-amr bil-ma'ruf, wal-nahy anil-munkar. This tawasi bil-haq, tawasi bil-sabr, what does it include? You're calling people to the deen. You are giving people counsel and advice, that's part of tawasi bil-haq. You're enjoining and you're commanding to the good, you're forbidding and standing up against evil. This is all part of surviving yourself. You can't just be a Muslim in your own little circle and not be concerned with the evils and the problems outside. You have to take them on and at least speak out against them. A few other things, inshaAllah, when we get to the nitty-gritty of the surah, but one last comment about the overview and we get into some other features of the wording in this surah. One is the comment of Ash-Shafi'i. We find 2 things he said. One of them is لَوْ تَدَبَّرَ النَّاسِ هَذِهِ السُّورَةِ لَوَسِعَتْهُمْ. If people only reflected on this surah, it would encompass them. It would be enough for them. And then another place he says, لَوْ لَمْ يُنَزِّلْ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ سِوَاهَا لَكَفَتِ النَّاسِ. Had there nothing been revealed in the Qur'an except this surah, it would have been enough for people. He sees something, Ash-Shafi'i rahimahullah, incredible mind in our history, he sees something in this surah that makes him say, this is enough for people. If they only pondered on the lessons of this surah. What is in this surah that's so heavy that he would say something like that, subhanAllah. It's a very heavy thing to say. I want to mention just some overview things. So within that, I want to say, one of the comments is the difference between khusr, which is used here, and 2 other words that occur in the Qur'an that are similar. There is the word khasara.